Hey, what's going on, guys? So, for as long as I can remember reading comic books and talking about comic books, I've always maintained that after Watchmen, there was this, 20-year period where everybody is just trying, and in a lot of cases failing, to replicate Watchmen. And this is a hot take, but I've always felt that Identity Crisis was the closest we've ever gotten to that. That is, until I read JSA: The Golden Age by James Robinson and Paul Smith.
God damn, Jimmy. This some serious gourmet shit.
So, JSA: The Golden Age is one of DC's Elseworlds titles. It came out in the early 90s, just off the heels of DC's big continuity relaunch with Crisis on Infinite Earths, which, in theory, collapsed the multiverse, and that's how a lot of the Golden Age heroes with the Justice Society and the All-Star Squadron were roped into the history of the mainline DC universe. They became the heroes of the Greatest Generation, and then they retired, and then the Silver Age heroes came along to replace them, which is weird because that's more or less what this book is about. But again, it has nothing to do with the mainline DC universe, so that's a little confusing. Also, James Robinson, around the time this book was released, wrote a Starman series, which I haven't read, but everyone who has claims that it's the greatest thing since pornography became free on the internet, so I kinda have to read it, and I will at some point. You just gotta give me time. This hobby is very expensive. But Starman is a major character in JSA: The Golden Age, and I'm not sure if it's supposed to be the same Golden Age Starman that appears in both books. I don't know. This just turns into one of those DC continuity clusterfuck things where nothing makes sense. But I also feel like you're not supposed to think about it. This came out in the early-ish 90s. There were a lot of mature reader titles that were coming out that were firmly rooted in the DC universe that just trailed off into their own thing. So much so to the point where it didn't even make sense to be connected to the DC universe. Hellblazer, Sandman, Shade the Changing Man, Lucifer, these are all comics that kind of take place in the larger DC universe, until they don't. So, at the end of the day, these comics work better when read in a vacuum, and JSA: The Golden Age is very much the same thing. This is a self-contained piece, and it stands on its own very well. So, this book is set between 1945 and 1955. It takes place in that weird little time period between the height of the Golden Age of superheroes and the dawn of the Silver Age. And this book is a direct commentary on the Red Scare and the fear of communism and the Cold War, and how the Cold War is really just an extension of World War II. In a lot of ways, you can compare JSA: The Golden Age to DC New Frontier by the late great Darwin Cook. They're very similar, and they're using a few of the same characters to tackle the same subject matter, except I'd say that this is a far less romantic depiction of the DC universe compared to New Frontier, which is probably why I'd say I prefer it to the New Frontier.
Heresy.
And I know, that is a hot take and a half, probably hotter than when I said that I thought Earth X was Kingdom Come but actually good, and that's not to say that I don't like the New Frontier. That's not the case at all. This isn't a Kingdom Come situation where I don't like it and I don't understand the appeal outside of the art. It's not like that at all, even if I do think that the art of the New Frontier is a large part of that book's impact. I genuinely love New Frontier, but I do feel that by default in its use of the mainstay S-tier DC Universe characters, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Hal Jordan specifically, and all of those characters, the icons, the archetypes, it forces itself to be a little more precious with the treatment of those characters. And I think in order for the commentary regarding the kayfabe of World War II and the narrative of America being the heroes of World War II, even though Russia, France, and the UK did a lot of the heavy lifting, and the horrors of war, and how in the end there are ultimately no heroes regardless of the outcome, and the near immediate collapse of the illusion of the American ideal during the Red Scare, when the US government was turning on its citizens and forcing people to turn against each other. I feel like in order for that commentary to work, you can't put any of your characters on a pedestal. This comic is gritty and disturbing, but interestingly enough, not mean-spirited. It's just uncomfortably real. The superheroes are completely demystified, but they're not morally compromised. They're still heroes, but they're people first and foremost. It really puts me in mind of The Sopranos. Throughout that show, Tony Soprano's always going on about the gangsters of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and how back then men were men. You know, he has this very cinematic reverence for his father and the gangsters of his generation, almost like they were movie stars in a Scorsese movie or something like that. But whenever the show flashes back to that time period that Tony's fetishizing, it's not really all that magical. Everyone's running around all schlubby and greasy. There's no decorum or code of honor or whatever. Everyone in the 50s and 60s are just as fucked up and confused as everyone in the 90s and the 2000s. And I feel like that's how this book is approaching the heroes of the golden age of the DC universe. Especially keeping in mind the era when this comic was released. It was a time where people felt that comics were being gimmicky and the heroes weren't acting like heroes like they used to back in the day. But this book, very similarly to The Sopranos, feels like a rejection of romanticizing the past. And the main characters we follow in this book are Johnny Quick, Starman, Liberty Bell, Tarantula, Hourman, the original Paul Kirk Manhunter, Miss America, the Americommando, also known as Mr. America, and Alan Scott Green Lantern. And there's a few other familiar faces here, like Johnny Thunder and the original Golden Age version of the Atom, but these are the major players. And like I said, this book picks up just after World War II has ended. The Americommando is hailed as the hero of World War II. He successfully infiltrated the ranks of the Nazi Party, and he killed Hitler when no other superhero could, mind you. And it's funny how this book plays with DC's lore and history, because the main reason why the Justice Society and the Freedom Fighters and the All-Star Squadron and all those other Golden Age heroes never entered the war was because Hitler had the Spear of Destiny, and it allowed him to mind control any of the superheroes that set foot in Europe. And this book says that that was some bullshit, that in actuality, Hitler had his own super soldier whose powers canceled out the abilities of other metahumans, and Starman and Green Lantern learned that the hard way, and it was ultimately decided that if any superheroes died in the war, then that would crush morale, so Roosevelt's PR team made up that whole Spear of Destiny thing. So between that and Tex Thompson, the Americommando, a D-list superhero, being celebrated for doing what no other superhero was publicly willing or able to do, a lot of the heroes ended up with bruised egos. But on top of that, the war itself just made the very concept of dressing up in a costume and fighting crime feel childish. And between all of that, a lot of the superheroes just retired. Some of them weren't so lucky. Starman ended up having a nervous breakdown because his research was instrumental in developing the atom bomb. Hourman is a junkie. Dude gets addicted to the pills that give him his superpowers. And Paul Kirk, the Manhunter, witnessed something during the war that ended up driving him insane. Which I don't want to spoil because that winds up tying into the overall mystery of the book. Because much like Watchmen, this is also a mystery story. However, unlike Watchmen, you don't know that it's a mystery going into it. Which I guess is a spoiler in and of itself, so I don't know. Sorry. But this comic is 4 oversized issues long. For like the first 2.5 issues, you don't know that it's a mystery. I didn't know that it was a mystery. Honestly, I was just vibing in the misery of all the characters. Johnny Quick and Liberty Bell are going through a divorce. Meanwhile, Liberty Bell is in a relationship with John Law, who's the original Golden Age Tarantula, and they have a turbulent and abusive relationship. Tarantula is very threatened by the fact that Liberty Bell was married to Johnny Quick, just because of Johnny's position in the superhero community, where he's very well respected and everyone goes to him with their problems. But Liberty Bell is also sort of written kind of shallow. You know, she's an adrenaline junkie, she chases after excitement, and now that all the superheroes are retiring, and after Johnny retires, she's not all that interested in Johnny anymore. But John Law is this up-and-coming novelist, and that's exciting, but now he's in this low point where he can't write anything because he's so obsessed with the fear of being cucked by Johnny Quick. That whole love triangle is extremely tumultuous. Meanwhile, Alan Scott is in this very weird position because he's talked about and treated like the Golden Age era Superman. You know, he's the one that everyone looks to. You know, he's, for lack of a better term, the guiding light of the superhero community. But he wants nothing to do with superhero life anymore. He actually has far more immediate problems because Alan runs a newspaper, and several of his writers are being targeted for suspected communist ties. So Alan is just trying to keep his newspaper afloat while most of his employees are being investigated by the HUAC. All the while, Tex Thompson is leading this massive political campaign against the Soviets. He is actively trying to start another war, and he's preying on a lot of the Golden Age era sidekicks who grew up as superheroes but are now just stuck, not knowing what to do with their lives because they spent their formative years crime fighting. So now they feel like they have nothing to live for. But now Tex Thompson is promising them a future in this hypothetical war against the Soviet Union. And Tex Thompson is a very interesting character in this book too. I really like how Mr. America, the Americommando, was used to illustrate the moral collapse of the illusion of the American dream. It definitely goes off the rails by the time you reach the end. And when I read it the first time, it caught me all the way off guard. But then I remembered that this book takes place in the DC universe, so, like, it's not all that crazy. But still, I will say, Snowball's chance in the hottest armpit of hell. If you are a fan of these Golden Age characters, there is a chance that you might feel like they're being thrown under the bus. That is because they are. But it's not dark for the sake of being dark. This comic is painting a very unflattering but sobering image of America post-World War II, and James Robinson and Paul Smith are using these Golden Age heroes to do that. And I feel like they do a really good job of that, while also, again, not feeling mean-spirited or overly cynical, but it's still very, like I said earlier, it's demystifying, but that's why it works so well. And it's also why I feel like it works better than DC New Frontier. And I don't mean this in a disparaging way. I mean, it's gonna fucking sound like it, but I really don't. I wonder if you switch the artwork between JSA The Golden Age and New Frontier, keep the stories the exact same, but just change the art. I wonder if people care more about this book and less about New Frontier. Not that I'd want that, because Paul Smith and Richard Ory's art for this book is very pulpy and gritty, and it's everything that this comic needs to be. But at the same time, I wonder if it had a flashier art style, if it would be more widely remembered. But, I don't know. Regardless, James Robinson, Paul Smith, Richard Ory, and the letterer John Costanza cooked. This is another one of those under-the-radar, super-secret yum-yum sauce specials that I absolutely have no idea how or why remained super-secret for so long. I don't know why nobody talks about this book. In my opinion, this should be in the same discourse as New Frontier, or Watchmen, or Dark Knight Returns, or Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, and it's just not when people talk about some of the greatest DC stories ever told. And I don't get it. But if you can, if you haven't already, give this book a shot. I highly recommend it. And yeah, that's the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.